Welcome to Bitcoin Fixes This, where we explore the impact that Bitcoin will have in all aspects of society. Today's guest is Dr. Jason Fung, doctor and author of many books, including The Complete Guide to Fasting. We talk about healthcare, the monetary incentives in the system, and why so many patients seem to be doing so badly. Jason also tells us about nutrition, fasting, and what he believes will make people better. Dr. Fung changed my life a few years ago when I listened to his book, The Complete Guide to Fasting. He's a well-spoken person that has a deep understanding not just of the human body, but of the medical industry in general. His philosophy of care is refreshing in a world of doctors that are pushing for more and more intervention. I hope you enjoy this interview. Dr. Jason Fung, how's everything going?
I'm good. How are you, Jimmy?
I am good. So excited to have you here. Where in the world are you right now?
I'm in Toronto.
Okay. How are things over there with COVID and lockdown?
That's okay. I think we're seeing the same thing as most people. That is more cases, but it's all right. The hospitalizations are not quite as bad, so it's hopefully we'll get through everything.
Yeah. I have to say, like, this has to be really kind of a trying time for any medical professional. I mean, not only are you under a lot of stress, but there's a lot of patients that you can't go see because, of COVID fears and so on. How's that been for you?
Well, it's a bit of an issue because, a lot of stuff is just closed, so people aren't getting their routine sort of care. So there's stuff that slips through the cracks, which is unfortunate because the longer it goes, the more that's happening. So, if it was just a couple weeks, it's no big deal. Now it's going to be a big problem to get caught up again. And, we don't know what we're missing. That is, people may be having problems, but since I'm not seeing them, I won't know about it and they won't know about it. I'm a little worried, but, as I said, everybody's doing the best they can, I suppose.
Well, so speaking of that, there's obviously like sort of a monetary component to what every doctor does. I think I was reading about how complicated the billing process can be and things like that. Can you tell us pretty quickly, like what are the economics of being a doctor? Like, how do you make money? How do you, how does everything work out and what are the incentives there?
We're usually fee for service. So essentially we're paid here by the government. So this is Canada, so it might be a little different in the United States, but essentially we bill for whatever we do. So if I see a patient, then I bill for it. If I see sort of a new patient, it's a little bit more. Follow-ups, sort of short follow-ups are paid a little less, and that's basically it. So it's all fee for service. And that's it. I mean, there are other payment alternatives in the United States. Some doctors are on salary, for example, and there's other ones where they have sort of different, capitation rates. So you get paid per how many people you follow, not necessarily if you see them or not. So that's another way that doctors are paid.
Well, that must be interesting for you because your books are talking about fasting and things like that. How much service can you give for something? The therapies that you promote.
I don't really make any money off it. With the fasting, the thing is that it's it's a free intervention, so it's just giving people the knowledge to do it, and supporting them as they go. It pays me no more or less to give that advice than to give no advice, sort of thing. Just give the standard advice. So it's really there's no incentive to it. Now there is an incentive from the pharmaceutical standpoint. So there's a whole huge conflicts of interest thing where doctors, for example, are paid to give talks, for example, by pharmaceutical companies. So you have a big pharma company, they give doctors, and sometimes it's hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to give talks to other doctors about drugs. And the thing is that it's not just, tell us about your expertise. What they'll do is they'll actually give the slide deck to the doctor to give talk to other doctors. And basically the problem is, of course, the pharma companies, they make the slides and they make their drugs seem amazing. So it's a very biased point of view. And so that's a big problem, because if now doctors, like, family doctors who are listening to these experts, think that it's a good medical advice as opposed to like an infomercial, then their guard is sort of let down, and they sort of take all these drugs and overprescribe them compared to sort of how effective they are. And of course, the issue, of course, is that the physician is taking money to give a talk. On the other side, the medications that they're prescribing are not paid directly by them, so therefore it's a big it's a very tough thing. It's sort of like if you allow, for example, a judge to take money from people. So if you have a judge and they're in charge of like casinos and regulation, and they're taking lots of money from the casinos, right? Then you'd say, well, that's not fair, because it's like, why would a judge be allowed to take money from a casino when it's trying to regulate the casino business or something like that, right? So that's a real issue for medicine. That is, the pharmaceuticals are giving doctors a lot of money, especially the academic doctors, the university doctors, and all that kind of stuff, to promote these drugs that then other doctors sort of prescribe. It's a real conflict, where you can get into a situation where drugs are very overprescribed. The pharmaceuticals are making a lot of money. The doctors are making a lot of money because they're doing this sort of on the side of what they do. And the people that pay the price are the patients who are getting drugs that they don't need, sort of thing. And then drug prices wind up going up, and that's a big problem in the United States. For example, insulin. The prices of insulin are skyrocketing. And this is a drug that's over 100 years old. So it's like, why would a drug that's 100 years old all of a sudden be sort of like triple the price of 10 years ago, right? It doesn't make any sense. It's sort of like buying, an outdated piece of equipment for triple the price. You'd be like, why would you do that? But of course, the patients aren't the ones who decide. It's the doctor who decides, and the doctor's taking lots of money from the pharmaceuticals. So it's a real issue.
Yeah.
So something like what I recommend, which is fasting and nutrition and stuff, doesn't cost anything. And of course, there's a lot of vested interests that don't want people to know this kind of stuff. They prefer you to just take your medicine, pay the pharmaceutical, which can then pay the doctors, and everybody's happy except for all the patients, right?
Wow. So essentially, what you're describing is a moral hazard where
It
the doctors are
actually,
getting paid.
oh, absolutely. So in fact, just yesterday there was a release from the one of the government agencies, and it basically said that this would be considered now a kickback. So, for those of your listeners who aren't familiar with what sort of happens, so doctors know what happens. So the pharmaceutical company pays a very prominent doctor, so usually some academic doctor at some big time university, and that big time doctor will then give a talk, and usually at the fanciest restaurant in town. So stuff that costs $200-$300 for one meal. And and then the regular doctors who are seeing patients, they'll go and they'll think, oh, I'm listening to this really high end, fancy academic doctor give me a talk about this drug. And of course, the talk is all about how good this drug is. And sometimes it's good, and most of the time it's not very good. So this happens every day. So for a while, it's not as bad now, but for a while, I could really just go to a fancy dinner 4 nights a week if I wanted to, and get it all paid for and everything. And then, of course, the pharmaceutical company knows exactly who's prescribing what. They get the information from the pharmacies. So they see that if the doctors who took this free dinner, if they're increasing their prescription rates, they'd be like, well, that's a good return on investment. So then they kept doing this. And if you look at, so ProPublica is a website that tracked how much money these doctors were taking. It's sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And so it is a real moral hazard, because now it's not simply, it's not simply you're prescribing what's best for patients. You're prescribing what's the most heavily promoted, and it's a real issue for certain types of drugs, especially like cancer drugs, where prices are through the roof. And it's a especially big problem in the United States, which allows more of this than any other sort of country around. So the one of the government agencies said, "Well, we're putting out a special fraud alert. We're now considering this sort of behavior, which as fraudulent, and doctors who do this kind of who give these take money to give paid talks, basically, could be in danger of both criminal and civil charges." That just came out yesterday, actually. So that's hopefully a step in the right direction, because it was a real problem that was sort of infecting our industry, and really making people lose a lot of respect for doctors, because they're like, oh yeah, all these guys want to do is push pills and stuff, not realizing the backstory was even worse than they imagined, that some doctors are taking hundreds of thousands of dollars to push pills on the side of, on top of what they make in their regular day, right? And other doctors are taking these free dinners, and it was just, everybody getting rich off the little guy. It was horrible. It's a horrible situation that has persisted. Like in 20 years, it's been going on at least that long, right? It's terrible.
Wow, that's kind of crazy to hear. And a large part of this is because the patients don't directly pay the doctor. It's usually a third party paying. Is that a part of it?
Yeah, so the doctor who prescribes these expensive medications, which are being promoted, so he doesn't pay. The patients often don't pay. So then it gets passed on. So, everybody's kicking the cost down, and then it goes to the insurer, who has to pay. And then, of course, the employers and the patients, they get mad at the insurers, like, oh, why are my premiums so high, and all this sort of stuff. When the problem actually is not the insurer necessarily, it actually is all through. And the problem is, of course, that physicians shouldn't be in a position where you're taking money from, you should make your money seeing patients, right? That's what you should do. And it's not right that you should be taking money on the side to promote drugs, which is going to affect your judgment as a physician, because everybody knows that if you take money from, like, you don't bite the hand that feeds you. So if you're taking money from a drug company, you're going to look more favorably on that drug company than you would have otherwise. So it is clearly impairing their judgment on what is a good drug and a bad drug. But we allowed it. Like we said, it's fine. It's to go ahead and do it. It's almost as if you're to say, oh yeah, a policeman, honestly, if he took a cup of coffee from a store, he could get fired in New York City, right? It's not legal, right? But then, because a policeman has to be impartial, right? And the judge is the same thing, and lawyers and journalists and stuff, like, it's all the same thing. There's conflicts of interest, and you have rules to say that, if you're a lawyer, you can't take money from this mobster, for example, like, to do things. If you're a politician, if you're a senator, you can't just go taking money from wherever you feel like, right? And yet for doctors, the rules were like, yeah, take money from whoever wants to pay you, right? So it was like, that's crazy. It's crazy that we should have rules like that when the public health is at serious risk.
Well, does that cause sort of like a bias towards more intervention than less? Because that seems to be a theme in your book.
Unfortunately, I think it does. And I think most physicians don't even recognize the problem, because they're on the inside. They're the ones on the take, right? It's like, it certainly causes a lot of incentives to prescribe lots of drugs. Because, hey, if the drug companies make a lot of money off the backs of the patients, then they're going to have more money to pay the doctors, and they're going to take these big fees. So there's one study I talk about, not in the book, but in one of the other posts I'd written, where somebody looked at it and said, okay, let's look at the editors of these medical journals. How much are they getting from pharmaceuticals? So I think one of the cardiology journals, one of them, I think on average they're getting, like, each of these editors, and there's like probably 50 of them, are getting like $440,000 a year on average that year.
Wow.
Each, right? on top of what they make as a doctor, right? It's like, whoa, a $440,000 bonus to sway so that your opinion is swayed in favor of doing procedures, giving drugs and stuff. And so you get into these situations where, for example, in cardiology, you have a whole, where they put the stents, right? So stents, when you put a stent in for people who have just chest pain but no heart attacks, it's a very lucrative thing. So people sent their kids through private school on that, right? And it's the problem is that was when they did the studies, it was completely useless. It was a completely useless procedure, but they're doing millions of dollars of these procedures every year for the same reason. It's highly incentivized. So this is the problem. I mean, it's human nature, right? You like who gives you money. So that's why we don't allow some people to give other people money, right? It's because we recognize that you can't have a judicial system, or you can't have a police system, or you can't have you don't pay, people don't, it's like paying protection money sort of thing, right? It's like that sort of stuff is just not legal, but it's legal for most doctors. And that's sort of wrong. So, and it that way, that's the thing. So when you have these doctors who are highly biased but don't even know it, then they're all like, let's give drugs. Let's not worry about fasting and diets and stuff, having people lose weight. There's no incentive for them. You don't have anybody paying them for that, whereas you're getting free dinners and trips to Vienna and all this stuff from this nice drug lady. It's like a terrible system.
Well, so I get why newer drugs. I mean, just the FDA process of getting one of these drugs approved costs like almost $1 billion sometimes. Like, why is insulin going up? Because, like you said, it's like 100 years old. Why is that
it's
price of
because
that?
it's lucrative. That's about it. So there was it started probably about 15, 20 years ago. There's this company whose whole, what it did was it bought these old drugs. So people needed these old drugs, but they're very small. Like they're not widely prescribed. So there's no alternatives. And they're old. They're like 20 years old sort of thing, right? So they took these old drugs, they bought the rights to these old drugs, and nobody else was making them. And they just jacked the price up like 20 times or something like that. And again, as long as it was relatively small and the the insurance companies, weren't paying a lot of money, it didn't matter. But then everybody else said, hey, look at this company. And they wound up in a lot of trouble for that. They eventually renamed their company and all this other stuff. But the other drug companies noticed, hey, look, these guys are doing great. All they did is take an old drug that cost $1 and started charging $20 for it. And that's a huge margin, right, for a drug that doesn't cost you anything to make. And so everybody else's, so that's when prices started going up. So for insulin, they just kept ramping up the price, and over 10, 15 years, the price just kept going up, because as long as somebody's not going to complain about it, there's very little alternative. And the other drug companies, so normally what limits this is competition, right? So somebody else comes out with insulin and sells it for cheaper, right? But what happened, of course, was that for the big pharmaceuticals, it's way more profitable to collude. So instead of everybody saying, okay, I'm going to come in with a cheaper insulin, they just said, okay, let's just keep raising the prices. Good for everybody, right? So even if you're a bit player, you don't want to put your prices down because you're making more money with the prices up. So it's just like those, remember in baseball and stuff, you'd have owners collusions and stuff. They'd collude to lock out the players and all this sort of stuff. It's the same thing. The drug companies are all basically colluding with each other because it's in their own interest to jack up the prices. And that's why you have prices of drugs in the United States, which are sort of multiples of what they cost, even in Canada. Remember, there's a ton of people who used to come into Canada, buy their drugs, and then go back. Of course, when the drug companies saw their profits going down, they put a stop to it. They said, "Oh, there's no regulation in Canada and stuff," right? But the truth is, they're just losing a lot of money.
Mm. Mm. Well, what you're describing economically is a cartel. And usually cartels are not stable unless there's only a few players, in which case, it can go on for a while. How many drug companies are there that produce insulin, for example?
Oh, there's a lot. But probably only about two or three. But the technology, anybody could really produce it. But again, remember that there's this whole way of doing things in the drug business that is different. So that is, yeah, you can take an old drug, put a little tweak on it, and say we need a patent, right? So. When you get a patent on it, then you're going to get about 20 years of protection. It doesn't necessarily work any better, right? So this is what they did. They didn't take the old insulin. There's a certain playbook that you have to follow. So you take the old insulin, you put on some, you change the molecule, you tweak it. And then you'll say, look, we get a patent on it because it's a new molecule now. So you get 20 years of exclusion. It doesn't work any better. And so the new insulins, most of them really just don't work much better than the old insulins, right? Sometimes they do a little bit, but you tweak it and then you get a patent on it. Then the way you sell it, of course, is you give lots of money to the academic doctors to say, oh, this new insulin is so much better than the old insulin because of this. And it's some made up reason. And then you basically send out all your drug reps to all the different things, buy free meals and free lunches to the doctor's offices. And before you know it, everybody's prescribing the new insulin because they've been sort of told how much better it is. It actually isn't any better, but the doctors think it's better because, the big guy from Harvard University who's actually getting, $500,000 a year to give these talks has been selling how good it is, right? But he's getting a lot of money to say how good it is. But the regular doctors are getting free lunches and free dinners to hear about how good it is. So they think it's great. So they just keep prescribing it because what's the difference? To them, it's instead of writing insulin, you write something else. It's the same amount of work. And the patients aren't paying for it. So in their mind, it's like, oh, it's all good. I'll give the new insulin, which I think is better. And of course, the whole thing's a bit of a scam. And drives up drug prices, but you get this sort of new insulin that is 10 times the price because they said, look, we put a lot of research into this, but really they put a lot of marketing into that. That's what you're paying for and a lot of profits.
Oh, wow. So all these drug reps are getting paid off and these doctors are getting paid off from the increase in price. They're capturing some of that value is what you're saying.
Yeah, because that's like somebody's got to pay for that free dinner and somebody's got to pay for those hundreds of thousands of dollars and those free trips to like Vienna and Frankfurt and Germany and all these places, because they send all these doctors to conferences all over the world. At least they used to. And doctors didn't want to pay for it, right? So they would simply want to, go and, I don't know. It's the way that it's been for a long time, and unfortunately, there's been little incentive to change, except in the last couple of years. They're hopefully getting that a bit better.
Well, so as a doctor, wouldn't you see your patients kind of get worse and wonder about like some of this stuff? Because what you're describing, especially with people with diabetes or something like that, at least from your book, I was like, wow, most of these people don't get better and they keep getting worse. Like, wouldn't that do something to the doctor?
You'd think so, but again, it's hard because when you all you're hearing is the same message over and over. So I talk about this in the diabetes code, for
Mm,
example, where if you think about type 2 diabetes, it's actually a very easily reversible disease. That is, if you lose weight, then your diabetes almost always gets better for type 2. But instead, the message that goes out there is that this is a chronic and progressive disease. You're going to have it for the rest of your life.
mm,
And of course, you need medications to manage it, right? Diet is not going to be good enough. So, of course, it's a very lucrative message for the pharmaceutical. So, but if you're a doctor and you're just hearing it from it, so you have one guy, that is me, saying that the whole thing is just wrong. Like, you need to, it's a dietary problem. Don't give drugs for a dietary problem. You need to fix the diet and things will get better. And of course they do if people work hard enough at it. But you hear one guy who says that and 20 guys, including all the professors of all the universities, saying, no, it's chronic and progressive and you need drugs.
mm,
Well, as a doctor, you're going to go with the 20 university professors who say, things will always get worse. You need drugs for the rest of your life. And here, use this new expensive drug.
mm,
So not only are you going to listen to them because that's who you sort of respect. Like, yes, maybe this one other guy, Jason Fung, sort of makes a little sense, but he's only one guy, and the rest of the world of medicine is saying give lots of drugs. And you're going to free dinners on the other side, right? You got free dinners, you got free trips, and so then that's the easiest path to take. People just say, oh, okay, well, I'll just keep treating diabetes the way it is. But again, the people who are hurt are the patients because they're not getting better. And the doctors don't see it because they're like, well, I guess that professor from Harvard should have known, and he's telling me to use drugs, and so I'm using use drugs. That's the best evidence. And the diabetes associations are saying give lots of drugs and everything. So then it's like at some point you simply go with that because you're hearing that other message of give drugs, sort of like
mm,
99 times out of 100. Right? And people are saying, well, it's a little strange that, on this other side, people are reversing their diabetes and actually losing weight and getting better. But,
mm,
it's like a minor sort of thought. And then you go to your free dinner and then you start giving more drugs again, right?
mm,
And all your friends, right? So all the university people and all your friends who are doctors are also doing the same thing. So you think that that's okay, right?
mm. So there's almost kind of like a hive mind about it that everyone's sort of plugged into, and you almost, as a doctor, I guess you have to almost unplug yourself from the matrix to see reality or something like that.
It's sort of like that because until you sort of step outside what you've been taught, you can't really see it because everything sort of makes sense when you're inside, right? Just like the Matrix, you're inside, everything makes sense, and all the messaging is very consistent. That you just have to give drugs. It's like, and then as your patients get worse, you get the message that hey, for type 2 diabetes, this is the normal situation. So it's like, of course they're getting worse. They have diabetes. With no thought that, hey, maybe we should get rid of their diabetes instead of just giving more drugs. So, it's the same thing with the insulin. So in type 2 diabetes, insulin levels are high. So why would you give more insulin, right? It doesn't make any sense.
Mm,
It's like you're doing the wrong thing. They have too much. So you need to bring it down, which is what fasting does. But you don't think of it that way because, again, there's only one guy who's saying that, and every other 99 other guys saying that, hey, this is just the way it is. So you just accept it and sort of go on. But yeah, it's a when I look at it, I always think it's a crazy situation that is allowed to persist because there's a lot of money being made off the backs of these people. Um, and that keeps them in the game, sort of thing.
mm. Yeah, it reminds me of the financial system. At least, my area of expertise is obviously Bitcoin, and that's totally the case where a lot of people think in sort of like an old way, when in fact it's actually very abusive, and like it's not helping people; it's actually hurting people, and they seem to think more of that is the solution.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because it's really the same case, right? Where people are saying, yeah, we're just going to print $1 trillion. And you notice how nobody even blinks, right? Because you
Mm,
already had the moral hazard from 2008, right? So
mhm,
they bailed out all those big banks, right? Yes, the government made money on it, but there are some who argue, well, those banks who took on those risks should have been allowed to fail because they took the risk. They should pay the price, right? And let a whole new generation of banks come up that are not going to put it at risk. But then, of course, they sold it as, oh, the little guy will get hurt. We need to pump these billions of dollars in. And how much was it? Like $700 billion or something Hank Paulson
mm,
wanted originally. And so now you have the same thing 10 years later, 11 years later, where you start talking about trillions of dollars and
mm,
nobody blinks an eye. They're like, oh, okay, well, no problem. And of course, because the cost of those trillions of dollars is very insidious,
mm,
nobody like they don't the little guy doesn't even recognize that yes, he's going to eventually get screwed in the end of all this, right? Which is what Bitcoin, because it's a stable currency, doesn't
mm,
doesn't have that problem.
mm. Yeah, definitely, and that's one of the things that I'm finding in parallel with kind of what you're saying, especially about diet and nutrition, because the bias is always towards like more and more intervention, whereas for you and what you're prescribing is actually like take away stuff from what you're doing, and that in turn causes things to heal on its own. So can you tell us a little bit more about your philosophy, you know in contrast to the typical medical advice, which is to take more drugs?
Yeah, so it's sort of like Nassim Taleb talks about via negativa, right? So you gain by subtracting, basically, and this is sort of it applies to a lot of different things. The more you take away, the better people generally are, and it's the same for drugs, right? You get in a situation where people just say you need to take more and more drugs, and there's nothing wrong with drugs. They have their time and their place, but you need to take more because generally that's what makes money, right? So you need to take more drugs, and the pharmaceuticals make more money. You need to eat more food, and so the food companies make more money. You need to take more supplements, and the supplement companies makes more money. But you're getting played. That's the problem, and there's a whole system that's stacked up against the guy who wants to take that away because you're threatening the business and the livelihood of all these companies, right? So instead of saying, okay, well, people need to eat, so if people need to lose weight, so you're 300 pounds and you need to lose weight. Well, the simplest and most logical thing is to stop eating for a while, right? That's what
Mm,
intermittent fasting is. So
mm,
eat instead of 3 meals a day, eat 1 meal a day, right? Very simple, obvious, and logical, right?
mm,
And who tells you that? Nobody. What's the message you get in terms of fasting? Oh, fasting's so bad for you. It's like you can't ever skip a meal. Don't go more than 2 hours without putting some muffin in your mouth, right? It's like
mm,
what? Even if you're 400 pounds and have a type 2 diabetes and you can't even walk, like seriously, why would you give advice like that? Like that's insane, right? But that's the message that you get all over the place because there's a whole system set up for that. It's profitable for you to take more food, right? And it's like, so that's why I come around and I say, okay, especially when I started talking about this in 2013, people are like saying, fasting's so bad for you. And you get this message on the media all the time. Fasting's so bad for you. You should always eat 6 times a day. It's like, how is eating 6 times a day going to make you lose weight? Like, tell me about that, right? That's like saying, oh, you should dry off by going in the bathtub. It's like,
mm,
what are you? Are you an idiot? It's like,
mm,
if you want to lose weight, you have to stop eating or eat less, right? And one way to eat less is to not eat for a period of time, right? So it's like, okay, here's the most logical thing in the world, like something that a 4-year-old can understand. And yet we've created this entire myth about why you need to eat more and take supplements and eat 6 times a day and eat these special foods in order to lose weight if you're like so heavy. It's like you guys are insane, right? Because you can't see the most simple logical thing. But of course it's not because people are stupid, it's because there's a whole, you know, you hear this over and over again, right? There's this message on the media, and the dietitians will tell you, and the doctors will tell you. Everybody's going to tell you. So you go, okay, you got this one crazy guy over here, Jason Fung, who says, well, if you want to lose weight, just stop eating, right? And you've got 99 other people who are saying, eat more, take supplements. It's like, what do you think you're deprived of? What nutrient do you think you're deprived of right now that you need to take a supplement, or you need to eat food all the time, right? It makes no sense. And it's like, the other thing is that if you have too much body fat, so you have obesity, you have type 2 diabetes, you have too much body fat. Well, body fat is a store of calories, right? That's all it is. So you it's precisely the reason why you carry body fat, so that you have sustenance when you don't eat, right? So when you don't eat, you're simply using your body fat. Exactly the reason you carry body fat. So you're using it for what it was designed for. What could be better than that, right? Really nothing. Like, it's so crazy, because it's so simple and obvious and logical, and yet people create this huge stories and myths about why you shouldn't do it, and how it's bad for you, and why you can't do it, and why you're going to die if you go a couple hours without eating. It's like, fasting has been around for thousands of years. Like, every major religion in the world has fasting in it. It's like crazy. It's a totally insane situation.
Well, what's more, at least the people that are sort of more into intermittent fasting, ketogenic diets, and so on, the thing that I notice about them is that they look much better and healthier. I mean, surely that has to count for something. Why isn't it more popular?
I mean, keto is already quite popular, and I think it's because there's a lot of people are worried, because there's a lot of naysayers out there, who again are there's incentives, financial incentives, to prevent people from getting better. So one example I remember a little while ago is there's this whole thing in the media about keto crotch. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you remember that, but it's this whole thing where people said, well, if you eat keto, you get this groin rash or something like that. And it's like, okay, I've treated thousands of people. I've never seen this. Nobody who was in keto had ever heard of this. But there's this concerted effort. It was very, it was big for a couple of weeks, because I think somebody had put a lot of money into it, into advertising it, putting it out there that you get this keto crotch. And it's like, that's not even a real thing. It was totally made up, and nobody had ever had keto crotch, right? And all of a sudden, so there's obviously some people who wanted to prevent it from becoming big like keto. But of course, because people were getting better with keto, that's why you see all this keto stuff really take off. I mean, it's become very popular. Same with intermittent fasting, right? It's like, you can keep people in the dark for so long, but once people start to say, okay, well, this makes a lot of sense, well, then it's going to get traction, because on the internet, people are able to search and find information and say, hey, this actually makes some sense.
Yeah, and they're getting great results. Could you speak a little bit about why it works so well? Because like, if you sort of fast for 3 days, it's a very different effect than if you and fast for 3 days and eat for 4 days, but you eat the same amount of food, like interspersed like evenly. You get very different results. What's going on with the body?
Yeah, so this is basically the difference between calorie counting and fasting, is that, people think about this as sort of, oh, if you eat the same number of calories, it's going to be the same, but it's not. Because when you eat a certain number of calories, like 100 calories, if you eat, say, cookies versus you eat, an egg, the hormonal response is very different. So when you take those 100 calories, your body can either store it or it can use it. Right? And that depends on the hormone insulin. So if insulin goes up, your body wants to store it. If it doesn't go up, then your body will do something else with it, which is burn it, basically. So what happens is that if you don't, so suppose you just cut down, so this is the way that we generally advise people to lose weight, which is, eat 6 times a day, cut your calories. And the problem with that is that you don't affect your insulin very much. So if your insulin is high, your body's going to store all those calories, whether or not, and if you take less, So say you start with 2,000 calories a day and you burn 2,000. Now you take 1,500, right? You cut 500 calories a day and you think you're going to lose weight. But the problem is because your insulin levels are still high, you're going to store it all. And then you're either going to eat more or your body's going to turn down how much calories it uses, right? So instead of burning 2,000, it's going to burn 1,500. So if you're eating 1,500 and burning 1,500, you're not losing weight. So it's really about the insulin. Insulin is what's going to toggle you. It's going to either tell the body to store energy or it's going to tell the body to use energy. And if it's high, it's going to store energy. If it's low, it's going to use energy. So the body exists in sort of one of two states, which is either it's in the fed state, insulin is high, store energy, or it's in the fasted state, insulin is low, you're going to burn energy. So if you just simply cut your calories but stay in the fed state, you're still storing calories and you're not going to be able to burn the fat. The point about fasting is that you're allowing your insulin levels to fall to a level where your body is now going to switch over and start using the calories that it's stored, right? So when you sleep at night, for example, and you're fasting for 8 hours or 12 hours or whatever, the reason you don't die in your sleep every night is because you're able to use those stored calories. But if your insulin is high, you can't use those stored calories. You can't get it through. So that's the difference. Is the fasting helps change the sort of hormonal profile of the body so that your insulin levels drop and you're able to use the stored fat. Because think about it, for example, say you weigh 400 pounds. If you weigh 400 pounds, you've got like hundreds of thousands of calories stored in your body fat. So if you have that, then why won't your body use it, right? And that's the reason is because you're not letting it, you're blocking it, right? It's not able to access those stores. Like the logical thing, if you have 100,000 calories of body fat, which is making you sick, right? The logical thing is to use it. But your body doesn't, because when you eat, you block the insulin goes up and you block yourself. You have no access to those body fat stores, right? It's just like if you have money in your bank account, right? And you have money in your wallet. Well, the money in your wallet you can spend, but if you go to the store and they say, "Oh, I need this amount of money," and all that money is in your bank account, well, you can't do anything. Like if they only take cash, then you can't access that store of money. Same thing with your body. So you've locked away all these calories in your body fat, but by eating all the time, you don't allow yourself access to it. So then you can't do anything about it. You wind up having to eat more because that's the only way you're going to get energy. So you've got 100,000 calories in your body fat, and it's totally blocked because you're keeping your insulin levels high. And then your body's like, "Hey, you need to go eat something because I have no energy to do anything." It's like, okay, well, that's crazy because all that stored energy, that stored body fat is making you sick.
Wow. Well, it sounds like there's sort of like two modes that your body gets into, like, sort of like that fasted state and the fed state that you were talking about. Can you tell us a little more about the benefits of being in that fasted state? What happens to you?
Yeah, so there's a lot of health benefits actually, because when your body recognizes that there isn't any sort of nutrients come in, then it activates something called autophagy, which is this way of sort of clearing out the body of this junk. So essentially, if you have no food, then you don't want extra cells all over the place because you got to feed those cells, right? So you just try and get rid of all this sort of excess junk. And it sounds really bad, but in fact, it's a very healthy thing, because as you get rid of all this sort of extra protein and extra junk in your body, if you need it again, you'll when you eat, you'll produce those proteins and stuff that you need because growth hormone levels are fairly high. So it's actually a way of rejuvenating your body. So the autophagy sort of gets rid of all the old junk, and then when you need it, you will build new stuff, right? So instead of, like, if you're thinking about how you renovate your bathroom, well, the first thing you got to do is throw out all the old stuff, right, before you can put new stuff in. You can't just put a new cabinet on top of an old cabinet. It just doesn't work. So the first process in the first thing you have to do in rejuvenation is get rid of stuff. And that's what the fasting does. It helps you get rid of all your excess junk. It's like a spring cleaning, right?
Mm-hmm.
You got to throw out all the stuff, because if you want to buy new stuff, you got to have room for it. And this is the problem. Like, nobody talks about that anymore. People keep talking about, oh, you got to eat for energy. Oh, you got to eat for this. You got to eat for this. It's like, you can't just keep eating all the time. You got to cycle between getting rid of stuff and getting new stuff, right? It's just like you can't keep buying stuff for your house all the time, right? You know how when you have your house and then your basement eventually just gets filled with junk. Like, it's just terrible, right? So, that extra guest bedroom, it always winds up getting full of just stuff that's just like, oh my goodness, why did I buy that, right? So you got to throw all that out. And that's what the fasting is. You're just trying to get rid of all the junk in your system that you don't need. And then you're going to be a lot healthier. So it's going to prevent you from gaining weight. It's going to prevent you from having type 2 diabetes. And those are two of the biggest risk factors for like cancer and heart disease and strokes. And those are the biggest killers of Americans. May play a role in preventing things like Alzheimer's disease and all this stuff. So it's like, those are the big killers. And if you want to be healthy, you have to avoid these diseases. And fasting, which is a free intervention, is going to help you do that for no money. And it's not only is it free, it's available to everybody. It's not like you have a drug where you have to distribute it to to everywhere. Anybody who listens, you just need the knowledge and you can do it yourself, right? You have all these people who are, and it's available and it's free, which means that if you're like some disadvantaged person, with no money and you're working and you're just trying to make ends meet, well, it's going to save you money, right? It's going to save you time. It's going to make your life easier, and it's going to make you healthier. You're not going to need to pay those insulin prices anymore. You're not going to have to see the doctor because you have the type 2 diabetes. You're not going to suffer that heart attack, right? All of which is, a huge advantage. It's convenient. You can do it anytime. You can start it. You can stop it anytime you want. So many advantages to the fasting compared to anything else that you can do from a dietary standpoint.
And yet people don't try it. I know people that have tried maybe intermittent fasting, but especially like longer term fasting, like what would be your argument to try that and essentially invite Marie Kondo to your body and get rid of some stuff?
You can do very well with just shorter intermittent fast. So I usually cut off at around, say, 24 hours. I call it sort of intermittent fasting, but there's no real cutoff. What happens when you go longer is that there's a few advantages and a few disadvantages, right? So when you do the shorter fast, less than 24 hours, say, so if you eat dinner and go to the next day's dinner, that's about a 24-hour fast. And you're going to get a lot of benefit from that already. The main advantage really of the shorter fast is that it's very easy to implement. That is, if you go from dinner to dinner, most people don't even care. If you skip breakfast, nobody cares. If you skip lunch once in a while, nobody cares, right? You start skipping dinner on a regular basis, and that's just a very social meal. It's the meal that most people take with their families and their kids and their friends. So therefore, you start skipping those, it starts to really impact your life. It's just hard to do consistently. Not that you can't, but it's hard for a lot of people to do. And that's why intermittent fasting is a great strategy, because you get most of the benefits and you can just sort of slot it into your life without, much ripples, right? As you go longer, what happens is that you get more and more benefits from a fat burning standpoint. So the way that the body works is that you can store sort of energy as sugar, and you can store it as body fat. So when you burn off the sugar, then you start burning body fat. And it takes maybe between 16 and 24 hours, depending on your previous diet. So ketogenic diets, of course, get people into this sort of fat burning stage all the time. But the thing is that if you go for 24 hours, you're sort of through all the sugar and now you're into burning fat. So now if you go 48 hours, you get 24 full hours where you're really just burning body fat. And you go 72 hours, you get another full sort of time. You don't have to go through that stage where you're just trying to get rid of the sugar. So there's a lot of benefit. And the other thing is that when you do longer fasts, the hunger tends to start going down. So after the first day or 2 days, you get that hunger when you're fasting, but by day 3, 4, and 5, a lot of that physical hunger really starts to go down. Like you don't feel hungry at all after a while. It's actually quite interesting. And the studies sort of confirm that too. And it's like, hey, if you're now, like if you're doing, say, you really want to lose weight quickly, for example, for a big event, high school reunion coming up or something like that, right? And you do a 5-day fast or 7-day fast, you're going to get these huge, quick results. And you're not even going to be hungry. It's like, whoa, I don't know what could be better, right? It's like, I don't know why you wouldn't do that. I think it's a great tool for you to use if you want to get quick results and not even be that hungry. So that's the big advantage. The disadvantage is, of course, doing longer fasts is a little bit disruptive for a lot of people. And the other thing is that if you're going to run into problems, it's more likely when you do long fasts, right? So there's not usually a lot of problems if you're overweight. If you're not overweight, then of course you should try and limit these as well.
Well, so one thing I wanted to touch on, which you kind of hinted at, is that people kind of have very dysfunctional relationships with their food. Why is that? And how can we fix that through some form of fasting?
Well, I think that a lot of the problems stem when people get messages like you should eat even if you're not hungry. Like breakfast is a prime example. So, a lot of people aren't that hungry at breakfast time. Statistically, the time of the day that you're least hungry is 8 a.m. And this is, an average. So some people, it doesn't hold true, but on average, people are the least hungry in the day because your body has actually started to, it actually activates certain hormones that release glucose and sort of suppress the hunger a little bit. So the point is that you get this message where people say, well, breakfast is the most important meal of the day and you should always eat breakfast. It's like, well, if you're not hungry, but you think you should eat because it's healthy for you, now, like that's a really tough time. It's going to make you have a dysfunctional relationship with your food because now you're trying to find some kind of food. Like, I'm usually in a rush in the morning. So now you're trying to find some kind of really convenient food that's relatively inexpensive. And then that's where you go eating sugary cereal because sugary cereal tastes better than, shredded wheat, which doesn't have a lot of sugar, right? So now you get into a problem where you're eating stuff that you don't really want to eat just because you think that it's healthy for you, when in fact there was actually no reason for you to eat it. You can break your fast at 12 just as easily as you can break it at 7 a.m., right? But you get these messages where people say, oh, you have to eat, you have to eat, you have to eat. And you get these messages where you say, don't ever fast, don't ever skip a meal. And maybe it's a little less now, but people say, you should never, ever skip a meal. Because you could, it's like, okay, but what if you're not hungry? Why would you eat if you're not hungry? If you're 400 pounds and you're not hungry, why would you eat? Right? It makes no sense. And then people, again, it's companies making their buck off the back of these people. So then you have these meal replacements, protein shakes and stuff. And I remember watching this episode of, My 600-Pound Life. It's one of those shows where people get the gastric bypass. So anyway, they're trying to lose weight and they're like, okay, we're going to drink 2 of these protein shakes, and then they spit it out because it tastes so bad. I'm like, why would you spend money to buy this drink, which tastes so bad that you can't even eat it or drink it, when you could just drink water and be losing fat the whole time? Because that protein drink or whatever meal replacement drink that you're taking is not going to make you lose weight. It's going to stall you, because if you don't eat, you're going to use the body fat. If you do eat, you're going to use the calories contained in that meal replacement. So you're way better off just to have some water, and it doesn't taste gross, right? So it's like, but why would you do that? Why? Because somebody, usually a doctor or a dietitian, says, you have to take this. And this other company is making a lot of money selling these meal replacement shakes, and then paying the doctor, advertising to the doctor, taking him to a fancy dinner, sending him to Vienna and stuff. convincing them how good these things are, right? So you've got the company making money, you've got the doctor making money, all off the back of this poor guy who's just, or poor lady who's just trying to lose weight and thinking that they're doing the right thing because their doctor and their dietitian told them to take these replacement shakes. It's like, that's crazy. Like the whole system's like just set up against the little guy. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm saying, here's the information, right? And I'll give it to you for free, right? You can watch me on YouTube. You can read my blogs, which are free. You can go anywhere. A book you can take out from the library, right? I'll give you the information you need for free because that's what's going to make you better.
Mm. Well, so you hinted at a lot of the money sort of like playing a big role in sort of the bad incentives we have and all the moral hazards that are there. How would sort of direct payment for maybe even results instead of service, say, from the patient instead of having all these third parties, how would that change this industry?
I think that it would. It would be a huge incentive, but it's hard to roll out, right? So if you say, well, I'm going to give you incentive-based pay, which is like, okay, lose this amount of weight, and then the doctor gets this amount, right? Then the problem is that you do, you know, you have people who always try to game the system, right? So no matter what you do, there's always incentive. So, people will cheat and stuff. And
so instead of having a third party like an insurance company pay the patient or the doctor for results, if the patient paid you directly, like how would that change things?
I think that would change things. I mean, because obviously the people who are happier with their care are going to sort of come up. I mean, I think that's what the United States tries to do, but it hasn't been too successful. So if you look at Canada, for example, we have a one payer system. So the government basically pays for everything. So the patient doesn't ever pay. We never charge patients. But it's very hard to put in a system where you have sort of, there are private clinics, but very few where the patient pays directly. It does work, I think, if you can. And the United States tries to give you a bit more choice in that. That is, you're not forced into a single government payer, right? You can go to this company or that company or this company. But again, I think it's the devil's sort of in the details. That is, actually making a system that's fair is actually very, very hard to do. So, I think that there must be some kind of way to do it. And I think most of it is just trying to get rid of the conflicts of interest rather than trying to reinvent the whole system. That's a lot easier to do. So it's just saying that, hey, if you're a doctor, you make your money seeing patients, and that's all you can do. You start taking money from a company, and you can no longer make money from seeing patients because your judgment is now compromised. And you have to say stuff like that. Just like you would say to a policeman, you don't take money from a store or you don't take free coffee from a store because that's going to impair your judgment. You're going to favor this store over the neighborhood store, right? So you have to put rules into place where you can do that, as opposed to saying, okay, well, we'll go, with a direct payment. It can work, but it's just hard to do from a practical standpoint. The healthcare in a lot of countries is sort of government based, and some would argue that it winds up better than a private system, which is what the United States has. That is, it's not that the United States has bad stuff; it's that if you can afford it, you get better care. And if you can't afford it, you get much worse care, right? So it's not fair; it's not equitable in that sense. So it's the same thing when you put in a system with direct payments. It's not as equitable. The people who can pay more are going to get better care, and the people who pay less are going to get worse care. And the philosophy of a lot of people is that we think everybody should get sort of at least a minimum level of care. So I think it could work, and it does work for other things. So a lot of stuff, it falls outside of the government payer. So So you do get a choice, like your dentist and other stuff. You do get a choice, or physiotherapist. You can go to whoever you want, right?
Well, all right. This has been an enlightening conversation. Where can people find you?
So you can go to my website, which is thefastingmethod.com. And also you can also follow me on Twitter, which is at Dr. Jason Fung. That's Dr. Jason Fung. Or check me out on YouTube. I have sort of some videos that are coming up. I'm putting new stuff out because the old stuff was really old. So I've got like 6 years old. So I've got new sort of videos coming out, sort of explaining all of this sort of stuff. So check it out.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Jimmy.
Well, that wraps it up for this episode of Bitcoin Fixes This. Dr. Jason Fung can be found at Dr. Jason Fung on Twitter and on thefastingmethod.com. Until next time, fiat delenda est.